Elmwood Transcona.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'm pleased to rise and speak to today's motion. As will come as a surprise to nobody in this place, Canada is facing a housing crisis. And it's not a recent housing crisis, but as time passes, it gets worse and worse and worse. My father used to offer an anecdote regularly, particularly when talking about the environmental crisis that we're facing, and he would talk about lily ponds. And one of the features of the growth of lily pads is that they grow exponentially, and so it starts with one, and then the next day there's two, and the next day there's four. And the lesson, both for the environmental crisis, I don't want to diminish that in any way, but also in terms of the housing crisis and where we find ourselves in the housing crisis, is that the day before the entire pond is full of lily pads, it's only half full. And so to a spectator who doesn't know anything about exponential rates of growth for lily pads on the lake, they might come by the lake and say, oh, well, there's lots of lake there. There's lots of time. Certainly the lily pads are coming in, but it's not that bad. We've still got half the lake. And as I say, there's an important lesson for that when it comes to the environment and the climate crisis that we're facing and the accelerating rate of change. But it's also important to understand the housing crisis, because we're now at the point where the lake is full. We don't have any more time to act. We have to start repairing the situation right away. So there is a sense of urgency. It's why when we came back to the House after summer, we were pleased to see the government have an idea that they wanted to move forward in respect of housing and something new and tangible that New Democrats have been calling for a long time, and that many stakeholders have been calling for a long time, which was to eliminate the GST on purpose-built rental. For our side, that we wanted to see that done as part of a comprehensive housing strategy. And we certainly do not agree that what the Liberals call a national housing strategy since 2015 is that. It's clear that it's missing many components, and that even the components that are there have not been effective in meeting the challenge that we face in Canada. So we were glad to see the government taking some good ideas from stakeholders and indeed from the NDP and saying this is something that we want to move forward on. But our problem was that we knew in respect of the changes to the Competition Act that they were inadequate. We know this because our own leader, the member for Burnaby South, has done a lot of work on the Competition Act and proposed a suite of changes to the Competition Act right around the same time. And so we wanted to see the changes proposed for the Competition Act and C-56 take the stronger tone that our leader has taken and doesn't shy away from taking when it comes to talking back to corporate Canada and letting them know that we see the role of government to require them to do right by Canadians, to not exploit their market position, to gouge Canadians. That's something we're not shy about, and it's something we believe the government should not be shy about. It's why we run to form a government that isn't shy about taking corporate greed to task. But in the meantime, we want to get as much done in that regard as we can, working with the Parliament that Canadians elected. So there was work to do on strengthening the Competition Act provisions. And we also, when it came to housing, wanted to see, as I say, a more comprehensive strategy, more initiatives, particularly to focus on building more non-market units in Canada. Because the fact of the matter is, no matter how many market units are created, there's going to be a lot of people that can't afford and can't access those market units. And when we build non-market units, whether that's in co-op housing or whether it's social housing where rent is geared to income, or whether it's investing in projects alongside the private market to ensure that there are at least some suites that have a below market value, whatever the combination of those things are, we know that that also helps relieve pressure on the housing market, because there are people who are sacrificing their prescription drugs and people who are sacrificing their food in order to pay market rent. And when they get an option to be able to rent a house that or a home that meets the needs of their family and allows them to have that extra money left over for essentials like food and medicine, that frees up market units for those who can afford them, but may nevertheless be struggling to access them. So one glaring oversight in Bill C-56 was that it excluded, without any good reason, cooperative housing from getting a break on the GST for purpose-built rental. That was something we definitely needed to fix, and we've received a commitment from the government to fix it at committee, along with some changes to strengthen the Competition Act. I mean, all you have to do is look at the latest case of the Rogers Shaw merger to know how frustrating it is for a Competition Bureau that wants to do its job. They couldn't compel evidence from Rogers or Shaw. That's something that's going to change here, where the Competition Bureau will be empowered to require certain kinds of evidence from the folks they're investigating. It also means that when the Commissioner of Competition believes that a market study is required, that the Bureau will be able to embark upon that on its own initiative, something we think is also very important. And we also argued for tougher fines for companies that do break the rules. Not just tougher fines generally, but also for recidivist corporations that don't learn the lesson the first time, that those penalties increase in order to deter companies from continuing to do things that they know full well they shouldn't be doing. So the government has agreed to this suite of changes. We will continue to press, because another thing we think ought to have been included here in respect of the GST exemption were projects that had already received a commitment of some kind of funding through the various programs of the National Housing Strategy. We know that not enough projects are getting funded under that strategy as it is. But for the ones who have been funded, some of those projects have been put on hold. Why? Because of rising interest rates. And so that means in order for the project to proceed, they have to find more money. They either have to do that through private fundraising, which is a very challenging time to do that at the best of times, or they have to increase the amount of government grants in their project, or they too could benefit from the GST exemption. And we don't think they should be excluded just because the project started before September 14th of this year. Extending the GST rebate to nonprofit housing projects that the government has already agreed to fund in order to make their project work after a year of punishing interest rate increases, we think is a small thing that this government can do to ensure that the people out there in our communities already doing great work to build housing that Canadians can afford don't have that work stymied by rising interest rates, but see something in their budget that makes it work. And removing the GST is the simplest way to do it. The government will collect no GST from these projects if they don't move forward because of the business case being ruined by rising interest rates. So to waive the GST for projects that otherwise aren't going ahead, we think is a very low-cost way to ensure that the government delivers on promises it's already made by allocating funding to these projects that have stopped because of circumstances beyond their control. That's not a fight that we're prepared to give up on. It's something we think should be happening. We're going to continue to argue for that. But we're not insensitive to the fact that there are a lot of folks who have announced that they do want to move forward with new purpose-built rental as a result of the GST rebate that the government is offering in Bill C-56. We know that we're already well past the point where we have time to contemplate how to act. We know that this is a demand that stakeholders in the housing industry, whether they advocate for market-based housing or non-market-based housing, have talked about as a way to pencil out projects. And so this is something that we need to be moving forward with. There was an opportunity to move forward quicker if debate on this bill were to collapse. But of course, it's not collapsing because no debate on bills really is collapsing in this place. The official opposition sees to that daily, whether it's by moving motions to take time away from dealing with government business or putting up speakers ad infinitum in order to ensure that you need some kind of time allocation or closure just to get to the point of having a vote on a bill. And so when we're talking about a crisis that is in full swing and the need to build more housing, more market housing, more non-market housing, New Democrats are prepared to work with the government to move this bill through far more quickly than it has been. We use the opportunity here to improve the bill, as we believe it's our duty to do. We would go further if we could, But there's only so far you can go with a Liberal government, apparently. We're willing to test how far you can go every day of the week. And we're going to keep fighting for the things that we think are very important, including fighting for new announcements in the fall economic statement around housing that make more funding available for organizations that want to pursue non-market housing, as well as offering financing on better terms for those who want to build rental housing in the market, but are struggling to make projects work from a financial point of view because of rising interest rates. So that's a little bit about why we think C-56 is important. It's a little bit about how New Democrats have worked hard in this place over the last couple of months to improve the bill. It's a little bit about what we're going to continue to fight for, and also a little bit about why we think now that we have reached some agreement on improving the bill, it's important to move it forward so that those contractors out there who are waiting to pick up the shovel and put it in the ground, but need the deal done on the GST, they want to see that move ahead. We think it's important that it move ahead. We think it's important that those units come to market and Canadians have the opportunity to rent them. We want to see those units come to market in sufficient volume that we can start seeing a lowering of the price of these units. We know that's going to take time, but delay won't help. We've been delaying already too long. Certainly delaying too long for 8 years under this government, and that's after 10 years of delay for meaningful action in the housing market from the previous government, and even longer before then, going back to the mid-90s when the National Housing Strategy was cancelled, and we saw a complete walking away of the federal government from building social housing units in Canada. That's when the first lily pads started hitting the pond, so to speak, Madam Speaker, and it's taken us 30 years now to see the pond filled, and us with really no more time to wait to enact important solutions. So, is there more that the government can do? Absolutely. We would want to see them get rid of the special tax treatment that real estate investment trusts enjoy. We want to see them take action to make sure that nonprofits that are experienced and have a great track record of delivering non-market housing in our communities have access to capital, so that when buildings with low rents come on the market, they have an opportunity to bid on those buildings and have the money in order to close a deal successfully. To make that happen, the term of art for that is a nonprofit acquisition fund. It's a fancy word. All it means is making sure nonprofit housing providers in our communities that are already doing a great job have the opportunity to run low-rent apartment blocks when their current owners don't want to do it anymore, instead of having a corporate landlord come in, superficially renovate the building, kick everyone else out, and invite tenants with higher incomes to come and rent those suites that formerly were homes for Canadians that can't afford luxury rent prices. Those are just some of the things that we think government ought to be doing. We're not going to get it all done in one bill, but we've managed to improve what's in this bill, and we think that it should hurry along so that we can bring more units to market. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Question.